It's live streaming on YouTube?
Yeah, we live stream on YouTube at the same exact time. Hello everybody and welcome to another camera class. My name is Saxon, your host, and today we are going to be doing, drumroll please, advanced cameras. Or advanced photography, if you will. So, kind of the synopsis of the class. As always, anybody who's watching online, feel free to chat in, ask questions as you have them. If you're watching this on a later date, my information will be in the last slide. You guys can always reach out at any time, call me, email me, whatever's easiest. Myself or anybody in the small electronics staff can get you taken care of with any camera needs that you have. But if you already own a camera and you have questions, I'm always available to help and answer those for you. So, and anybody in class, by all means, got questions, interrupt. So today for advanced photography, we are now going to break away from what we've been learning the last couple classes. So just kind of go recap through everything. Intro to cameras, we're talking about the buttons, the layouts, the controls, if you will. We're getting a little bit into some of the extra things that you can do with the camera and how to take a nice photo. Intermediate camera, last week's class, we're talking about things like f-stop, shutter speed, ISO, how all three are separate, how they all come together, and then a little bit more about lenses, focal length, compression, distortion, what lenses are needed, and then a few other little accessory points as well as some content creation. In today's class, we're really going to focus on editing our photos, so the next step in the photo process, in my opinion, and then, framing photos, but then we're going to get into some more advanced accessories and why they might matter to you, the user. So without further ado, let's jump into it. So the first thing we're going to talk about is JPEG or RAW, and this kind of explains where we're going to get into with the photo editing process. JPEG is going to be the standard way that we take photos and save photos. That's the image in the center of the screen there. And a JPEG is great because if we're not looking to edit or do anything crazy with our photos, they're typically a smaller file size, easy to send on your phone, easy to to share with others, easy to, not necessarily manipulate, but we can at least get them saved, sent out. We can do a mixture of different things with them. And it's a very common way that we save photos in today's world. A RAW photo, on the other hand, is a photo that is going to be a much larger file size. And when we initially take that picture, the photo itself is going to look a little washed out or maybe just a little bit flat, if you will. And the idea behind a RAW image is that it's meant to be edited. It's meant to be manipulated. So if we look at the example that I have on the screen right now, the center being the JPEG file shows good color, shows, separation with color, but it shows the standard image. To the left of that, the RAW shows like a washed out, doesn't look like it's completely their image, just looks like almost sandy, if you will. But then on the very right side of that whole thing, we're going to see a processed RAW. And we can tell the difference right off the bat between a processed RAW and a JPEG. You can see how much more saturated the black shirt is, how much shinier the guitar is, the difference in skin tone that the gentleman has, the strap that he has on, the sunglasses, his hair. Again, it all has a little more color to it and a little more definition, more highlights between the dark and the light colors too, which I think is huge. And that's what a RAW can do for you. So when you just have a RAW by itself, it doesn't look that great. But when you go through all the steps, excuse my stuffy nose, everybody, allergy season's kicking the butt. Process RAW photos, once you go through the steps of editing and changing and manipulating the photo, really offer you something special and can spice up your photo game if this is something that you're looking to do. And I do share that because for the most part, a lot of people are comfortable with JPEG. And if that's all you want to do, by all means. But if you're looking for that next step, you've mastered your ISO, your f-stop, your shutter speed, you understand how to manipulate the camera physically when you take the photo, the next real step is going to be the after of that, which is to edit and to sit through and make sure that we really change the integrity of that photo. So, kind of going through those differences again, but written out for you. JPEG, a compressed file, so that makes it smaller. That smaller file size makes it about 2 to 6 megabytes as a standard image. Now, it can differ from camera to camera. If you've got a high-end luxury camera, whether that be, something from Nikon, Sony, Canon, Leica, Panasonic, Fuji, whatever it is, some of the file sizes can differ. You can have much larger file sizes for a standard JPEG. However, for the majority of cameras, depending on the range that you're in, 2 to 6 megabytes is pretty average. Now the color bit is lower. It's 8-bit color. What that really stands for is the amount of manipulation that you're able to do to an image. So if you were to compare a JPEG versus a RAW, you can of course edit a JPEG. You can change it in many different ways. However, by editing it, you might not notice big differences. And if you do notice big differences, it's going to be very apparent that it goes one way or the other. Whereas with a RAW file, it's going to have a larger color gambit, meaning that if you make incremental changes, you're going to see small results instead of a giant jump from one end to the other, or without noticing no real change as you edit and fix things. Also, to go back to, a RAW file is an uncompressed file, meaning that it's not shrunken down, meaning it's a larger size. So for example, a larger file size can be anywhere from 12 to 16 megabytes for a standard camera. In one of my cameras that I shoot with, which is a 61 megapixel camera, it's a Sony 7R Mark V, fantastic camera, great resolution. Every time I take a picture on RAW, it's close to almost 100 megabytes in size. But when I take a standard JPEG, it's closer to about 20-ish megabytes a second for each photo. So again, depending on the camera structure that you're at, high end, low end, in between, those are going to differ. Now, when we're looking at the editing process of a RAW and a JPEG can be edited on any photo editor. So if you have your entry level, the one that your computer provides you, you can edit the photo JPEG wise on there. But if you, let's say, have the RAW file, you have to be able to edit it on that software. So Adobe, for example, is a great one to look at. That can be edited with a RAW file. So if I want Photoshop, Lightroom, can absolutely do it. Things like DaVinci, which is more of a video editor, you can do RAW in there. Things like Corel Paint Shop Pro or Capture One Pro, those offer the editing on the actual app itself that you can do with RAW. But certain ones, you can't do it. You're going to have to then convert it down to JPEG or another file format in order to do something with that RAW. So keep that in mind too, that this isn't just a one-trick thing where, okay, I have a good camera, I'm going to shoot in RAW now, get my images. You might need to make sure you upgrade. Not enough coffee. You might need to make sure you upgrade that editor. See, I got you with a yawn too. See, isn't that crazy how easy it is to transfer a yawn? The next thing too to keep in mind is that a JPEG can be transferred faster. So if you're on vacation, you have no plan on editing those photos, or maybe you want to edit the photos on a later date, you can always shoot with JPEG and RAW turned on a camera. It'll take up a lot more of your file space, but you can do that. That being said though, with JPEGs they can be transferred faster, so if you want to send those to friends, colleagues, or what have you, it's a lot easier and smaller to do it with a JPEG than it is a RAW. Moving forward. So we covered how to make the camera take a picture. And that was in the introductory or the intro class, the intermediate class. But what do we do after with that picture? That's the next big thing. So there's multiple things we're going to talk about. The first one, we edit. We edit our photos. So to start it off, before I get into this, these next steps are what I recommend to anybody who is looking to edit their photos. Everybody does it a little bit differently. This is the way that I was taught and how I learned, and this is the step-by-step that I do every time that I edit my photos. Whether that be a simple one of my dogs because I shot in RAW, whether that be something more complex for a client or for someone a little bit, just something in general, maybe just a little bit more high-end. These are the steps that I go through. First and foremost though, editing software. We should be looking at some of the nicer softwares. If we're going to be editing RAW photos, and if we're going to edit photos in general, it's one thing, like I said with that Benjamin Franklin quote, the bitterness of the joy of a good price or a good deal is only as comparable or follows with that bitterness of a low price. You know, you sometimes with photography need to spend more money than you wish to in order to get the results that you're looking for. It's kind of the weird truth behind it. However, there are ways around it. But if you're going to edit your photos and you want to be more professional about it, Adobe Photoshop and Adobe Lightroom are two of the best programs out there. They and Adobe have been probably doing this the longest overall. and they make some of the best software when it comes to editing photos. You pay monthly for it, but if it's something that you're really into and you can maybe make some money off of it, or you have a business with it, you might be interested. Capture One Pro and Corel Paint Shop Pro are two of my other favorite ones, and the reason I like them so much is because you pay for them one time. It's about $300, $400 to get into it, so it's not cheap, to say the least. However, by doing it, you now have access to the app at all times. You don't pay any monthly subscription for it, and you have it on your computer forever and ever. So also not a bad deal, definitely a good thing to look into. Without further ado, let's also first start with a couple things, without further ado. But before we even further ado that, we're going to look at some of these images. So to compare and contrast, why do we edit images? They could be for something as simple as this. So to start, if we look at the picture in the top left corner, the left side of that image looks dark. It doesn't have necessarily a pop in these bright colors that both the man and the little girl are wearing. You move over to the right side, the background feels more warm, the purple is brighter on his sweater, and the little girl's blue dress really stands out, and I think that's a cool, again, cool aspect of what we can get with editing our photos. On the right side from there, we have this kind of scenery of a swampy, marshy area. Left side is a little dark, not saturated with that color. On the right side, the greens, the blues, everything pops a little bit more. On the bottom left corner, we have the newborn infant child. We have on the left side, the wrinkles, the scuff shadows, just more of a harder image when we look at the left side. However, when we compare it to the right, the skin is softer. The baby looks more angelic. Blue of their wear looks a little bit more fun. It's things like that that can be just, again, a little bit of a difference. And then you get into something a little more drastic, like the bottom right corner where you have A, B, and C. When you go from A to C, you can see things like her skin tone lightening up a little bit more to show more a light. You can see that if there are blemishes or wrinkles, those have been removed or disappeared. On top of that too, you can see the hair as well has been lightened up to show off more of the highlights. And then lastly, her sweater, which shows a very dark blue color in the first image, has more of a teal color as you get to that last one. So it's little things like that that, again, you might have taken the best photo ever for yourself, but there might just be that extra little push that you can give in order to bring out that color. That's what we're looking at here. That's what we're trying to achieve when we edit. So first and foremost, I call this my editing at a glance. You can always become more severe and technical with it as you progress, but this is the way that I start with it. So crop and clean my image. I start by straightening the alignment of the photo. After that, go through and make sure that you have, oh man, that's a bad one. I've never noticed that spelling before. That you do not have excess negative or dead space. Spot cleaning should occur at this time too. So if we look at the image on the left, I start by cropping my image. So I talked in one of the first classes about negative space and filling the frame. This is a beautiful image. You got a really nice blue water, girls kayaking, you're getting a cool view behind her, or you can see everything in front of her, what looks to be a little island, clouds in the background, forested areas. It just has a really cool, surreal look. However, we might not be interested in that. Maybe our main focus is the girl. Maybe this is our wife, our girlfriend, our cousin, our daughter, our niece. Who knows? But maybe we want to focus on getting them a really fun picture. They want to use it for social media, whatever they have. Or just they want a cool image of themselves. We crop the frame a little bit more on this one to get rid of negative space that we don't want in there for whatever reason. We fill the frame. The next thing I would do in this case is I look for blotches, stains, any bad parts of the photo. When we take pictures, there's things that we get on the lens sometimes. It could be inside the camera, the lens, the sensor, it all depends. But those are going to be little dark spots or little spots on the image that maybe cause blemishes. This is the same thing if we see skin tones that don't look right, or if we see zits or pimples or marks on the face. Those are things that we can then use the spot cleaner to clean up and change in order for us to get a more perfect image, a cleaner image. It's little things like this that you might not notice, your viewer might not notice, but in the long run of things, this helps the image become more clear, more crystal, just getting a finer tune to what we're trying to do. So start by cleaning and cropping. Crop the image down if that's something that you need to do. If you don't like the frame, whatever it is, you make it to your liking. Second thing, go through and clean marks or images that are on the image and get rid of those. And spot cleaning works very simply. There should be a tool that allows you to do it. Typically you circle a different part of the screen, and then you're able to move that over and kind of clear out that image. A lot of these new tools too that Adobe uses offer AI technology, and so it's a little bit different than it used to be years ago, where like for a blue sky like this, I would find the cleanest part of the blue sky, I'd circle it, I'd bring it over, and I'd then replace that little spot with that. Nowadays you can circle it, you can tell it, hey, I want to remove that blemish, it pops it right off. So there are a lot of ways around it now, and it makes it so much more simple than it's ever been. But this is the first step, is to clean and crop that image. Once we've done that, we can look at adjusting our white balance. White balance doesn't refer to exposure. Rather, it refers to the color of your overall composition. You will have less to play with when shooting in standard JPEG versus RAW. That's what we talked about earlier. Some editors will have presets that you can control and change. Others will have temperature and tint, and some will have both. So, what do I mean by that? In some editors, rather than you sit and play with the dial of temperature and tint, like we see on the right side of the image, you will sometimes see that we have settings or presets. Those presets then allow us to change the white balance, so it takes the color white in the image and rebalances that against everything else, giving us the ability to manipulate the overall color. If we want something to look like it's in shade, we can do that. If we want something to look like it's in the daylight or a flash, or maybe more of a cloudy weather type, tungsten or fluorescent. And those might sound silly, but tungsten would be more referring to a nighttime, and fluorescent would be more of what you maybe see indoors with fluorescent or incandescent light bulbs. Those are great options, but for the most part, you're going to see temperature and tint, and that lives on a CMYK color line. Cyan, orange, yellow, and K. I always forget that, but I know it stands for the purple color. These are all going to be ways for you to adjust the white balance of the image and get it to be exactly where you want it to be. Some people want a photo that looks like it's nighttime, others want it to look like it's day. This just gives you that ability to play with the whites in your photo, manipulating and giving a little bit more character, if you will, to those images. Once I've done that, I'm going to move over to exposure and contrast. So now I've done my spot cleaning, I've cropped my image, I've made sure that the color white that I'm using in the image is exactly what I want it to be. The next thing I'm going to do is then adjust my exposure and contrast. So exposure, let's start with that. Exposure plays on the brightness of an image and the brightness and the darkness of a photo. Beware of making a photo too bright, because you can get a muted or muddled look to your photo. So if we look at exposure, that's going to be the right side. We can see that underexposed keeps a dark, shadowy image. Normal from the camera has a nice mix of shadow, sky, building. Overexposed, though, is giving us this muddled and muted look. So if we look at that overexposed side of that picture, the sky blends in with the building. Barely can see this building where the building and the sky meet. Our sidewalk gets very bright, which again looks nice in some ways, but it also removes those shadows that you're seeing from the trees, and it washes out the green, makes that less colorful. So exposure will make the image lighter or darker depending on, not depending on anything, but it'll make the photo lighter or darker. The biggest issue, though, is that if we go too overexposed, we're going to risk having a whited out photo or just a photo that doesn't look 100% right. But if we go underexposed, now we have a dark image that looks like we had shade or an intense filter of some sort that's distorting our image. Contrast, on the other hand, plays with dark and light tones. High contrast makes the image stark with very dark and very light sections. Low contrast will make things look flat and washed out. If we look at the before side of the image all the way to the left, we can see that by playing with the contrast, We can get something that has more dramaticism to it on the after side. You see more shadows, more variation in shadows, a stronger highlight when it comes to the way that the light is hitting the mountains, just more of an interesting image overall. Whereas when we look at the center image, it's a great picture, you're very dark on one side, but by playing with both exposure and contrast, you can see that the rocks now have a two-toned color. They aren't necessarily as dark in most sections. Now what I really like about playing with something like that is just the fact that when we look at it, we can see the detail in the rocks and everything else. When you look at the rocks, you can see the shadow and the watermarks underneath the rocks. Yet at the same time, when we look at the surface of them, we can see the bright, not bright, but that reddish orange terracotta color just offers something that's a little different than what you normally would see. So, why do we play with exposure and contrast? It's to really make sure that we play with the lights and the darks of our image. We've gone through, we've changed our white balance. We've made whatever kind of undertone of white that we want. When you think about shooting, think about lighting. There's orange, or not orange, but warm light, cool light. You have fluorescent bulbs that offer something different, daylight that offers something different. And when you take that light and you compare that to the color white, you can see that white gets manipulated very easily depending on that color. However, that's just the white part of our image. Our image also has extreme light and dark tones to it that don't involve white. So you take one, black piece of paper and you put it down. In one side, it might look a little gray. In the other side, it might look stark black. It depends on the light that you have. So that's where you start with the white balance. Moving into exposure and contrast, now you're playing with those dark tones and making them more edgy or less edgy. You're taking the entirety of the image and exposing it to more light, which then might help you play with your contrast a little bit better to bump that up or down. This is all a scale. One of the things I'll say now, and I'll say it at the very end, is that while this is all great to do in this order, remember that you're going to have to probably go back and revisit these aspects of the photo in order to make sure that you're getting the full effect out of there. Just because you change the contrast or the, the exposure one time, doesn't mean you're going to leave it like that. Once you manipulate the rest of the image and you change other features on there, you might have to go back and revisit and either bump up or bump down on the scale depending on what you can get. So, crop and clean our image, play with the white balance of our image, then we move into playing with the exposure and the contrast of that image. Now, one of the things we can look at is a histogram. A histogram is going to be a meter of sorts that it shows us shadows, midtones, and highlights. A histogram isn't always needed when you're editing, but a histogram is a great way to see how light is distributed throughout the image. So, if you're really curious, this to me is a perfect example of what a histogram should look like. Your shadows are strong. They're definitely stronger than your highlights, but they're not overpowering the most important part, which is the midtones. The midtones live at the middle of your image. And by that I mean basically they should be the majority of what you see. Now, highlights on the other hand should be the lowest. And think about that. If highlights were higher than everything else, it would be a washed out image. Same thing if shadows were higher than everything else. It'd be a very dark image. So it makes sense that we want this mountain range style for our histogram, where we have the balance between shadow, highlight, and midtones. Midtones having the most weight, shadows and highlights having then the least. Now, it's important to remember though, that while this is great, these rules are always meant to be broken, like I said in the first class. So when we look at the next slide, we can see that not every image is the same. An example of what those histograms can look like. So if we look at the image on the center there for properly exposed, we can see that midtone still rises above everybody else. Now, the dark colors are at the very bottom. They're like the smallest. When you look at that though, you can see that in this image, there's not a lot of black, there's not a lot of dark. You see it in the building, the trees, what have you, but for the most part, you're getting more mids and highlights from the clouds, the break in the water, the building itself having the white kind of end caps to it where the glass or that construction meets. There's a lot of highlights in this image, even if it does have a little bit of a darker undertone to it because a storm is rolling in. However, when we look at overexposed, we can see how washed out the image is, making the histogram jump all the way to the left side. So that's one of those things where, at the end of the day, we have to decide for ourselves what's the most appropriate for what we're doing. Now, if we look at underexposed, we can see that midtones and shadows are in the forefront there. However, we can also deduce that because of that, we have a very dark image, and you see that. The sky looks dark, you don't see a lot of that building in the image itself. It overall just kind of has this gloomy effect. Very similar to what we were just looking at when it came to exposure and contrast. Playing with the histogram, which breaks this kind of stuff down, is what is going to help us in the long run when it comes to figuring out how exactly we want these images to look. So this is a great tool to use, but is it necessary? No. And I use the image on the right to demonstrate that. We can create dramatic and exciting images using literally no part of the histogram. So again, I'll show the example. You got the first picture on the left there, or on the left side of the right picture. So if we're looking at the four images stacked on top of each other, the top left corner, you can see how saturated the midtones and the highlights are and how low the dark colors are. But you look at the image and it looks clean, it has the right amount of light, but you realize that there's just not a lot of dark tones on this, it's mainly lighter colors. We look at the bottom left corner and we can see we're on the complete opposite side of that. Now we have a very dark and gloomy photo, yet the way the fog rolls in and the purple on the sky and the way things look, we get this very cool, gloomy, but like also moody shot. You're adding more to the experience for the person looking at the photo. When we look at something like the picture on the top right, we can see the same thing. We're in the very dark portion of it, a little of midtone. But look at where we're at in the image. We have a pitch black forest behind two brightly lit green pieces of vegetation. We can see those green pieces of vegetation in perfect detail. However, everything else is dark and pushed towards the back. And on the complete flip-flop of all those, the bottom right corner, you have the dandelion. And the dandelion is showing extreme in the light category. However, it has small undertones of midtones in that center portion section. So again, it depends on what we're looking at and how we're doing this. But as good as a histogram is to break down light, relationship with light within the image, it can always be broken and it doesn't have to be followed. But it's a nice tool if this doesn't make sense to you when it comes to contrast and exposure, of something that you can use to help you with that a little bit more. The next thing we want to do is adjust vibrancy and saturation. So vibrancy will increase or decrease the color intensity in brighter colors throughout your image. If we look at the right side, we have our dog. The dog's looking at its nose. The original picture shows off the dog's nose, that's the center one. And we see the color of the dog, we see the eyes, the tongue, has good color. We're seeing the variation in the fur, the tongue, the eyes. However, we can only go in multiple directions there. So, if we look at minus 100 for the vibrancy, it almost looks like now we've turned this into a black and white photo. The eyes still have good color, the tongue still is pink, however, it feels flat in the fur section and in the background. We compared it to the minus one or plus 100 vibrancy, where the tongue is now bright pink. The skin or the fur of the dog has more of a yellow-green tone to it, more ochre. The eyes are brighter. The background has more color saturation. By playing with vibrancy, we're taking the brightest portions of the photo, which could be the fur, the eyes, the tongue, and we're giving more life to those. With saturation, we are now increasing or decreasing color throughout the whole image entirely. So we look at the whole image, we're taking everything from the darkest and lightest to every other tone and bumping that either back or forth to give more saturation to the colors that we see. So rather than just playing with the brightest or most intense images, or brightest or most intense parts of the image, we're now playing with the, what's the term I'm looking for? The whole image. Thank you. Saturation overall is going to make the image look brighter. So when we look at the one on the left, we can see how dark everything kind of is, but we still have beautiful color in the sky and everything else. However, when we look to the right, we can see the rainbow of colors inside the sky. The blue, the purple, the orange, the red, the yellow. It really does change as you look through the sky. The grass is greener. The water is bluer. The yellow parts of the fields that are there are more pronounced. It's those little things, much like with our vibrancy change, where now we can see the color of the tongue stronger, the eye color stronger. Those are the types of things that we'll notice when we play with them. And some people are going to want to turn them down. Some people are going to want to turn them up. It's dependent on where you're at. So again, we start with cropping and cleaning our photo. We move into our white balance. We move into contrast and exposure. We then look at a histogram if that's necessary. But if that's not, then we are going to go into our, I think I forgot a slide. Oops, nope, it's the right one. So then we're going to go into vibrancy and saturation. This is the next big step of editing. This is what gives you that color that people are looking for. Some people will say cameras like Canon or Sony, they already have good color saturation. However, that might be true, but as an artist, as a photographer, as someone who's looking for the next steps, this is what every photographer has gone through for their whole life, which is manipulating the photo to look the way that they want it to or intended it to. We're never always going to get the image perfect on the first try. And that's where we have these editing softwares to help us better our image or play with lighting, color, what have you. Now, last thing we're going to do is adjust the sharpness. It's one of the last things you should be doing after you edit the other parts of your image. So again, I know I've reiterated this like 6 times, but clean and crop. Auto white balance, play with that. Now you go through and we change things like the exposure, the contrast, the vibrancy, the saturation. So we've got the colors we want. We've got the shadows and the tones that we want. We've played with the color of white and made that balance towards whatever the effect that we're trying to go with. Now we want to take an image and make it sharper. If we look at the fox on the bottom, so its sharpness will bring out definition and depth of field within your images. So too much, though, will create a halo effect around the image. When we look at the fox, we can see on the left side that the fur becomes more sharp and detailed. Every little separation between the fur now has more detail to it that we couldn't see necessarily before. With the frog, on the other hand, now we have this beautiful sharpness on things like its eye, its mouth, the way its arm is going against the leaf. Those are little things that might not seem that important, but that little extra bit of playing with sharpness allows for a stronger definition or line on our item, a nice color pop to it. Just more information detail that we weren't able to get before, but now we're really seeing it come to fruition in life. So one of the last things you do is the sharpness tool. Now, however, like I said in the beginning, and I'll say too again, just because you now have gotten to this step doesn't mean you're done. A lot of the times you might look at an image and say, this just doesn't look right. That's because now you gotta go back and you gotta play with these things. So now I've adjusted sharpness, okay? Well, let me take a look at my contrast. Maybe I should play with that a little bit more. Maybe the vibrancy should be turned down slightly. It's too bright in certain areas. Okay, maybe I should clean up this part of the image so that way I hide a blemish that I didn't see before. That's now more pronounced because of what I'm getting out of there. It's little things like that that you'll start to notice, And there's no one way around it. But I can tell you now, by following these steps, you're getting closer to editing photos at a professional level. There's always going to be more tips and tricks and everything else that you can learn, and I always recommend checking out YouTube. I have a bunch of pages that I follow where all they do is talk about camera stuff, and I love it. So keep that in mind. The last thing we're going to look at in this, and then before we get into some other other things that you can buy, is what to do after you're done with that. And that's to display or print your images. I feel like all too often nowadays, people have a tendency to put the photo on their phone when they really only show people when people bring stuff up. And they'll say, oh, take a look at my image. Take a look at this. And while that's great, it lives on your phone. It's not present. The whole point of photography is to capture a memory and show it off. So the next steps are to print and display your images. Now I like to show this slide, and I know it seems silly, but if you're shooting with a crop sensor camera, ASPC, micro 4/3, a bridge camera with a 1-inch or 1/2-inch sensor, then you are not going to want to print bigger than 10 by 12. The reason being is that the bigger you start getting in these images, the more blurry they start to become. The more blurry they start to become, the more detail they miss out on. And while that might not seem like a problem right now, it can present itself later on when you go to print it and it's a pixelated or just not crisp image, especially after you've taken the time to edit and fix and do all this change. So crop sensor cameras, 1-inch cameras, micro 4/3 cameras, you want to use a 4.6, 4x6, a 5x7, a 6x8, an 8x8, 5x10, 5x10, 8x10, or a 10x12 max. So that way you don't distort or disturb your image. Now, however, if you are shooting on a full frame sensor, so full frame, large format, wide format, I know that's something that Fuji offers with their X-T4, then you want to shoot, then you can print anywhere as small as 6x6, but now things like 11x14, 12x15, and 16x20, 20x24, those are all now available to you, the shooter. Now, again, you can always try the crop sensor camera to print bigger. However, you might notice the blur, you might notice the distortion, it just won't look right. So keep that in mind. One of the things I really like nowadays are digital picture frames. They become more and more popular. We have them here at App. I personally own 2 of them. And I think they're great. They're great as gifts. They're just great in general because most of these have 2 options. One, you can put an SD card in there and you can load up as many pictures as you want via that system. But these new ones by a brand called Aura allow for you to download an app on your phone. Then you can upload unlimited amounts of photos on there. You can have them cycle through what images show. You can have them too where they stay on one image. You can set it so it turns off at a certain time of night or day when you're not home, when you go to bed, whatever have you. But it's a great way of showing off your images, not having to buy a bunch of frames, and also not having to commit to holes in the wall or this or that or movement of the product. So overall, great option to get into if you're not looking to do all the framing and the printing. Go digital. It's a great way to show off your photos, have those memories present so others can see them without being obnoxious with it. I will say one of the things I don't like is when I go into people's homes and they have a million pictures on their wall. It's like, okay, this is overwhelming. You know, I understand if you're a grandparent or a mom and a dad and you have kids and huge memories and lifelong things, of course you preserve. But if you're a new couple, a newlywed couple, and you just went on vacation at Disney World, if you have 1,000 pictures of you at Disney World with your wife, I might have questions for you. That's just me. But if you're going to use something like a digital picture frame, you can have as many of those as you want. They cycle through, and it's a small little footprint. But if you've got a fireplace, you want a picture of you and the family, or your kids that you took when they were on vacation, 12 by 24, 16 by 20, maybe even something small like a 10 by 12 would still be a great option for something you can print, have the memory forever, and have it hanging in your home. You want to surprise somebody with a picture of your own for their birthday, a gift, what have you. You can do that with this kind of stuff. So not a bad option. But please, I do recommend print and display your work. You've taken time to take the pictures, to learn how to use the camera. It's a real big shame when that image just lives on your computer or on social media. Because think about it, how long when we look at Instagram or Facebook or Twitter, how long do you stay and actually stare at that image? Is it that often? Is it only a couple seconds and you move to the next? It's things like that that you should keep in mind when investing in cameras and time and effort into all this stuff. Now, let's get a little into videography and talk a little bit more now about content creation and some accessories associated with that. Now, you might be asking why this matters. And for today's world, a lot of people are trying to get into the content creation business because they realize in order to grow their brand, to grow themselves, to just become maybe more versatile, they need to learn this kind of stuff. I myself don't do it, but my friends that are professional photographers, they sometimes charge up to $3,000 for one shoot. That's a lot of money. If you're a business or a young entrepreneur, you're trying to show off your work, your projects, whatever it is, learning how to use a camera and buying the camera equipment can be a lot cheaper than having to hire somebody to come out and do professional photos. Now again, you're paying money for the time, for the skill, for the equipment, for a lot of different things. But if you can become a master of that craft and learn it yourself, there's a lot of reward in that. So when it comes to videography, let's talk about it. Within filming videos or content, you're going to go through a couple phases of work, and there's 3 phases. Pre-production. That's the initial steps to begin making your project. This is where you sit down and you brainstorm. What am I making a project about? What am I taking pictures or videos of? Is it my kids? Is it the business I work at? Is it the craft that I'm doing? Is it the process of which I go through? Is it just the final product at the very end to show it off? That's pre-production. Those are the first beginning steps to figure out what it is that you're actually going to be doing. And that should also be your time to really figure and write out exactly or plan out what you're going to do. Okay, well, I'm making a video about my motorcycle that I love and that I built in my garage. Okay, what do I want to do? Well, I probably want to get a cool shot of me riding the motorcycle somewhere, so I've got to find a location for that. Maybe I want to get a really fun picture next to the beach of that same product. Now I've got a plan for that. Those are the things that you can plan out and execute, so that way when you actually get into the production, the main phase of capturing clips or the film to use, you now have a plan. You have your kind of skeletal outline to then get the product that you want done. Once you've got the shots, you've got the pictures, you've got the videos that you're looking for, now you get into post-production. That's putting it all together to make that final piece. That's you going through and cutting out excess filler that you don't need. That's you going through and changing things up a little bit so that way it fits the mood that you're trying to be in. That could be the color that you're changing. That could be the music that you're adding. That could be the sound effects that you add. It could be so simple and so complicated at the same time, but it basically comes down to you, the person doing the project. Things to keep in mind when doing video and anything else is that we have steps, but we also have quality, ratio, and then FPS that we need to look at. Anybody who knows TVs or has bought a TV in the past couple of years probably has heard the idea of HD and 4K and standard definition, all sorts of stuff. Keep this in mind when you watch your local news. If you have cable still, you're watching that in HD. No signal is greater than 1080 HD. Some channels have the ability to go to the 4K quality. Unfortunately, not all do, and most don't. Very, very far and in between. That HD channel, though, is still going to be a really great image quality. And when you mix that in with something like a 4K or 8K TV, you get the TV that then upscales the product that you're watching and gives you the best quality. When you watch things like Netflix, Hulu, Disney Plus, HBO Max, ESPN, I don't know, any of the apps, those stream in 4K. Those give you the 4K quality of your video. Now, if you're watching something older, it's going to upscale and do its best. If you just turn on Cheers on Hulu, it's not going to show Cheers in 4K. It's still going to show it in that standard 1980s definition that it had. However, your TV is going to do a real good job of cleaning up the picture and making it look good. So when we shoot video, we have the same options available to us. You can shoot in 720 HD. You can shoot in HD. You can shoot in 4K. You can shoot in 8K. Standard definition, high definition, 4K, 8K. And what that stands for is the amount of pixels that go one direction, so horizontally, by vertically, and then it is divided by the diagonal of the actual video. So if we're doing this, so for example with 8K, you got 7,680 pixels going horizontally, 4,320 pixels going vertically. That then divided by the diagonal portion of it are going to then give us our final result of 8K. Doing the math the same way for 4K, full HD, and standard definition, that's the difference for what it is. So depending on your audience, depending on what you're trying to put this video on, that's the kind of thing that you're going to get. So if it's standard definition that you're after, or if it's, let's say you're trying to put this on Facebook, you probably don't need to shoot your videos in 4K or show it in 4K quality. You probably can get away with HD. If you're shooting this for a TV, for movie, for commercials, you probably want to shoot in 4K, and if it's available, even 8K. Remember that 8K is not available really on anything other than very high definition TVs. A lot of cameras now are entering the market of 8K. My camera, for example, my professional camera, my Sony, can do 8K video. Do I really ever use 8K video? No. Tried it one time, and I got about 14 minutes of video on there, and it was literally almost 32 gigabytes worth of information. It was a lot. So keep that in mind when you're doing stuff. 4K, HD, standard definition usually are more than enough. Ratios. Ratios get a little more complicated, but the idea behind it is that your image sensor is a little rectangle. That image sensor then has ratio bars or lines on there that then can be changed or manipulated in order to give you a certain effect or certain details. Think about it this way. Back in the day before the rectangular TV came out, you had widescreen, you had full screen. Full screen was more of that square-shaped TV, and the widescreen was then where they started to then get more into that rectangular shape. You buy a DVD, you buy a VHS, it would tell you widescreen or full screen on the box. Ratios kind of give you the same thing. So if the red line that's around on the bottom right corner there is our sensor size, that's going to be a standard ratio of 4 to 3. 4 going horizontally, 3 going vertically. So again, smaller side versus the longer side. A rectangular shape, not a square shape. If we want a square shape for our video, let's say we're filming for Instagram or for some other media form that makes our video square. Rather than cropping in and getting all these ugly lines on there, we can shoot one by one. That's a great way of being able to get our square video without having to sacrifice or change quality or anything like that. The other thing we can do too, if we want more of a dramatic effect or something that has more of a vintage appeal or has more of that classic video-esque appeal, could be the 3x2, could be the 16:9. So again, you're just changing the parameters of what your sensor is actually capturing. If this is the entirety of the sensor, that red line, then the green line would give you a little bit of gutter space, the blue line would give you a little bit of gutter space, and the 1x1 would also give you some side gutter space. And those would just appear as black lines on your physical video. Again, everyone's a little different on how and what they actually want out of it. That's really up to you. I'd say majority of people are going to do a 4x3, but if you are someone who's trying to blow up on Instagram or put something on a certain social media platform that requires the small square box, then a 1x1 ratio would probably make the most sense. If you watched the movie Oppenheimer recently, you'll notice that in certain scenes they cut into a 3x2 ratio or a 16:9, depending. I think it was more 16:9. The 16:9 ratio is to symbolize the fact that they were going into his mind a little bit more and that he was starting to go into depth of his feelings over dropping the atom bomb. So they made it more dramatic by cutting in on the video and taking away that full screen from us. It was more dramatized. There's a lot of cool things you can do with that, and that is something to experiment with. The last thing on here is FPS, frames per second. Why do frames per second matter? It's because of if we want to make something look more stop and starty, or if we want to make more slow motion, or if we just want to make a standard video. If we shoot 12 frames a second, we're going to get something that looks a little chippy-choppy. To gain certain effects, or to blur, or to have some fun in the video, maybe within our editing process, we might do something like that. Standard TV, cable, anything that you're watching is 24 frames a second. If you're watching your local news channel tonight, remember that there are 24 individual pictures for every second of video that you're watching. That's how this works. A video, in general, is just a picture stacked on top of each other and continuously played. Each picture is going to have a slight different motion that's happening while it's going. And then when it's played fast, it gives you this effect of a moving picture. It's a really famous image of one of the first ever videos that was filmed. It was more of just a set of photos. It's of a horse going through a finish line. A lot of people, what they then do with that is they turned it into a really cool effect where as it's rotating and going, it can turn in this carousel fashion where it looks like the horse is galloping and moving. That's about 12 frames. And that looks really cool as far as a horse running and crossing a finish line. It's one of the first ever videos captured probably in the late 1800s when that was captured. 24 frames is what you're going to see for most news and media and just TV in general. 60 frames a second is when we want to get closer to something more high definition, more slow motion maybe, speed things up, slow things down. If you film in 60 frames a second, you now have the ability to go back in and edit and change those speeds depending on the effect you're trying to get. So you can splice your video into certain sections, make things fast, make things slow, and you won't lose image quality. And if you truly want to just film in slow motion, 120 frames a second is recommended. The more frames, the slower you make that, then what's going to happen is the more detail that's in there. You're not going to lose certain effects. When you watch certain sports or certain things, they shoot sometimes in 60 frames a second, so that way when you see the baseball players swing the bat, you can get a really crisp slow motion video of that. Same thing when someone's doing a layup or a dunk. They get a nice slow motion recap of that because they slow the frame rate down. But the more frames they have, the crisper it is. So why is all this important? It's deciding these little factors that can make or break a good video from a great video. And the video itself could be something mild. It could just be you talking about, a new piece of art you made, or it could be your restaurant that you're trying to make more popular. It could be that little bit of editing that you can do there. It's the small details overall that make the big difference in the end. So, your must-haves. If there are 3 things you must have, it's camera quality, lighting, and audio quality. When I first started teaching this class, I had all the guys from our media team tell me 2 things. 2 things can be good, 1 thing can be bad. If 2 things are bad, no one cares about what you're doing. I was like, okay, that really helps, thank you. So, camera quality, let's start with that. Having a camera that shoots appropriately for the content you are trying to make. It doesn't have to be movie quality, but it has to work for you and your project and page. You can shoot on a Sony Cybercam from 2002 if it works for what you're trying to do. But if you're trying to make something that is movie quality, you want to be the next Steven Spielberg, whatever have you, then you're going to need a nice camera to do that. So keep that in mind. For lighting, use something like the basic 3-point lighting method, which I'll have an image of it in just a moment. But you have 3 things, a key light, a fill light, and a backlight. The key light provides the most direct light to your subject. The fill light lights the subject up to fill in what the key couldn't. And the backlight keeps the subject and background separate and doesn't give this kind of smooshy effect. Lighting is so important to an image because that's how we see images. When film was the only way we took pictures or video, you needed light in order to get that picture or video. If you didn't have light, You didn't have an image. Nowadays, you got these sensors that can pick up low light and all this other cool performance stuff. However, you still need light in order to get certain quality. And when we talk about exposure and contrast, the more light you have, the better, because we can always make an image darker, harder to make an image lighter. Audio quality is the next one. Cameras are going to have microphones built into them, and we'll talk a little bit about that too, but there's also shotgun mics, on-camera mics, and wireless mics that are great as well too. Now let's jump a little more into detail. So, my example for lighting, key light. That's the center light. That's the one that is hitting your subject at an angle at which it's lighting the whole subject up. The fill light then comes through and it's going to provide that extra little bit of light to make sure the subject is completely in light. We want to make sure we don't have any awkward shadows. That's what we're trying to avoid. The backlight is then going to be exactly what it says. It's the one that hits the back of usually whatever it is that you're taking a picture or video of. And that's going to make sure that you don't have an awkward shadow behind your subject and you get this little nice background to foreground separation without necessarily losing or adding any harsh angles to your subject. Alternative lightings that you can look at. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that these slides were going on this. Alternative lighting that you can look at. On-camera flash if you're a photographer. It's a great item to add on. Adds a quick burst of light. You know, probably the most famous for lights, flashes, how that goes. LED light blocks. Those are great tools that you can add on. They shoot in different Kelvins and different brightnesses. They're typically as cheap as $30 all the way up to $200. They have good battery life on there. Some even act as a phone charger or a camera charger. And again, there's so many different purposes for them, but they offer something unique to the user where they don't need a flash or separate lights everywhere. And lastly, a ring light. Very popular during the pandemic. They became really popular during COVID. For anybody working at home making content, ring lights became one of the best pieces that you could add on. Microphones. So mics are an important part. Cameras have in-camera mics, and that's what you see in the top left corner there. But think about camera mics like this. Camera mics to me remind me of TV speakers. These TV companies put so much time and effort into the video and the quality of the TV, the brightness of the TV, just the way that the TV looks, that they really don't put that much effort into the speakers. The reason being is that if you want true, better sound quality, you're going to buy a surround sound system. You're going to buy a sound bar, bookshelf speakers. You're going to buy something else to amplify your sound. You're buying a TV for the picture, not necessarily the sound. And I think a lot of people forget that. Same way goes for microphones. You're not buying, mics. You're not buying a camera for its microphone quality. You're buying a camera for its image quality, for processing. So, if we want good sound, we have to invest in something else. On-camera mics, like a shotgun mic, Rode is a great example. You point the microphone towards what you're trying to get. It's going to capture audio in a cone-shaped pattern. That's great, because then you get a nice wide area of your subject and as they talk, but that also is bad because as you're using it, it's picking up noise and disturbance from everything else. If we want to be more precise, we get a wireless microphone. Wireless microphones are great. They clip onto the subject matter. They offer a nice audio quality without being too boisterous, and they come in at lower prices nowadays because so many companies like DJI, Rode, Ceramonic, a bunch of different companies are making those. Now, if we want even more precise and more hidden, we can get a lav mic and actually attach it to those wireless microphones. Lav mic is what you'd see news anchors have, where they have a little microphone attached to their collar. You barely see anything, offers a little bit more professionalism, and it looks really cool. Lastly, too, is a boom mic. These are for people that can't have microphones on them at all. This could be something like a movie set where they're going to be moving in all different directions and you're going to get front, background, everything else. Instead, you use a boom mic where you're keeping the microphone above someone's head as they're talking. Now, is this the most realistic and the most used object? Absolutely not. It's a very, very niche product. However, though, it's a very cool product because, again, depending on your usage, this could benefit you a lot. If having a microphone or having a cord or a transponder on you as a person isn't something you can do. So something to keep in mind. Stabilizing your shot. This is another important aspect of taking pictures or videos. You're going to see three main types of tripods. The monopod and the still photo tripod or ball head joint tripod are going to be better for video, or for photo I should say. Both offer a certain amount of stability. Obviously the tripod will offer more than the monopod will. But the monopod's nice for those who are outdoorsy, adventurous, can't carry a lot of bulk with them, but want to make sure that when they're using their camera they can stabilize in such a manner where they get good, whatchamacallit, they want to stabilize so they can get a good clean shot without having a shaky grip. Nice, nice, comfortable, easy to carry around. Is it the most practical? Probably not. When you're doing photo, still photo, a tripod or a ball head joint tripod is going to be the better way to go. It's going to offer you the most stability. It's going to offer you a rotational ball head so you can really get the camera angle that you're trying to get. Overall, it's just going to be a little bit easier on the user as far as stability goes versus a monopod. And then there's video tripods. Video tripods are not going to have a ball-headed joint on there. Instead, they're going to have a pan and a tilt. So the pan is obviously going to be your ability to go this direction. You're panning your subject. When you take a panoramic photo, usually you go this direction with it. The tilt is then the vice versa of going up and down. So not only are you able to go side by side, but now you're able to also go back and forth and tilt as you're going. That's a great option to have, especially for video. Video tripods too oftentimes can come with a wheel accessory. So if you're in an area with smooth surfaces or an area that you're going to be going back and forth with, you can put wheels on the bottom of that and almost use it as a caster wheel system, so you're able to move and duck and kind of maneuver yourself in whatever venue it is that you're going. And with the pan and tilt feature, you really get all the aspects that a camera would normally have. Gimbals. So this comes down to, I can't have a tripod, I'm taking video, I need the most stabilized shot I can get. Single-handed gimbals are probably the most popular on the market right now. I'd say they blew up in popularity within the last 5-6 years. Great for running and gunning. You want to take cool videos of your kid's track meet and you get the opportunity to be on the field. Maybe you want to run alongside them while they're doing their thing. You can hold the camera and get that stabilized shot, and if you're bouncing around, moving everything, the gyroscope on the camera, the pan, tilt, and roll feature will stay locked into place and it won't move, keeping the camera nice and still as you're bouncing around and doing all the stuff. The two-handed gimbal is in a similar boat, offering even more stability for the user. However, this usually is a two-person job. Some person has to monitor a screen in order to make sure you're getting the shot and it's focused in the right way. The other person is then the gunner, the runner, the cameraman. And last but not least, probably one of the most silly ones is the body gimbal stabilizer vest. I don't sell these, nor have I used one, but I have friends that do own them and have used them, and I've seen them wear them, and I think they're silly. However, if you have a $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 camera rig that weighs over 80 pounds, this is going to be one of the only options that you have for something like that when running and gunning for a project or a video. Is it the most practical? No, but will it offer you a great amount of stability and take weight off of your weight off your hands? Yes. It distributes the weight evenly between the pole and your back, giving you a little bit more ease when using the products. My friend, one of my old roommates, has a really funny video of him with a $40,000 camera setup. He's using it and he just lets go while it's on the stabilizer vest. It drops about a foot and then it just dangles there. It's really cool when you look at it. Obviously, are a lot of people using a body vest stabilizer? No. But that's another accessory that you can get for your camera usage. Now, this is the last slide I have for this. I try to keep this one simple. I get a lot of questions on setting your gimbal up. Now, using your gimbal with various configurations of both camera bodies and lenses will require you to stabilize your gimbal before every use. If you're using a product like DJI, they have a really handy app that you can download, and that will give you the ability for the pan, the tilt, the roll features to make sure that you set them to the proper weight. When you're doing that, it's pretty straightforward and simple. But one of the things that I will tell you is that use fluid motions and practice your shot prior to shooting. I get a lot of people that come in, they'll buy a gimbal for the first time, and they'll just take it out thinking they can use it immediately. And I have this conversation with them that while, yes, you can, if you've never used one of these before, it's a weird contraption. It moves the camera in ways that you didn't think it would before. It can cause a little bit of frustration at first use, but they're really cool, they're really fun, and they offer you this ability to run and gun with it, which I think is awesome. So a lot of kids now, or a lot of people that are doing content creation for videos, etc. I have a bunch of clients that come in and they'll do stuff for music videos for them and their friends. They'll use something like a gimbal in order to do that so they can get really cool shots and move with the artist or whoever it is without giving a shaky camera quality. So again, depending on what you're doing exactly, a gimbal is a great piece of equipment to add to your camera arsenal if you need that extra bit of movement, run and gun feature, or just overall stability. And with that being said, that is all I have for you guys. So this was Advanced Cameras. Next Thursday we're going to be running the Beyond the Traditional Camera. That's going to be our class, our last one of the month before then we recycle and go back into Intro to Cameras. In that class next week, we're going to be talking about things like drones, GoPros, 360 cameras, camcorders. More of an entry-level experience. However, we're really going to be focusing in on what exactly makes those cameras so unique and different, and why you might want to add them to your arsenal. The one thing I think is so important about it is what's the important use to you, the user, and what's the end product that you're going to get. So, thanks everybody for paying attention and watching. I saw a bunch of people were online to watch this. If you have any comments, questions, concerns, you want to chat about cameras, you have a camera problem you're experiencing, call me, email me. I will say email is probably easiest. If you call and I don't answer, leave me a message. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. I'm off Tuesday and Wednesdays, but I'm always available if you have any questions or concerns. Do you have any questions or concerns?
Just the from the picture frame thing.
Yeah.
Like you said, like not to go over 10 something, because then it'll look too pixelated. So you were going like 8x5 and all that.
Oh yeah. So depending on the size of your camera, depending on the size of your so there's sensor sizes. There's cropped and full frame. If you are using a crop sensor camera.
Oh, 10x12, over 10x12, yeah.
Yeah, try not to go over 10 by 12. You probably can push it and get 11 by 14. However, depending on your camera quality, megapixels, all that good stuff, that could affect the 11 by 14. And when you print out that image, it might look a little blurry or pixelated. So keep it 10, 12 or less. That'll make sure that you keep a rich photo, no pixelation, no blur, and it really gives the person, a good frame.
What about with the digital ones? Would it apply? Like, because I know they sell them bigger as well.
No.
The same thing applies, or then you can go big?
You can go big because it's a digital screen.
Okay.
Digital screens typically always look better. Like if you're in a movie theater and you put on an image of yours, it'll probably look fine on a movie theater screen.
Okay.
However, it's one of those things that the bigger the frame, the more pixelated it can look. So it can happen, but no. Typically, we sell something I think that's close to like 10 by 11, 10 inches, 11-inch screen. You'd be fine with any camera on that one.
Okay. I just that one. Yeah, because I wanted to get one.
Yeah, no, they're awesome.
And I wanted to go the biggest one as I could.
Yeah, absolutely. They're great. I like the digital frames. I have, like I said, a few myself, and they're just nice to have around the house. They do a really good image quality. But on top of that, too, they give me the ability to see my images without necessarily having a, what's the word I'm looking for? Without necessarily having like all these prints everywhere.
Right.
I'm a poster collector. I collect my posters from the concerts and my shows that I go to. So for me, I don't necessarily want to add more photos to my wall, but I love the fact that I have these couple frames going. They're showing all my images all the time. I've got my vacations, my friends, my family, my dogs, everything on these frames. And as I'm looking, I get to see all this cool stuff, and it cycles and it goes through.
Yeah.
I have it set on a 5-second interval timer, so every 5 seconds a new image pops up on the screen.
All right.
Borne, as always, thanks for coming in. I'll give everybody a couple more minutes. I'll stay here. If anybody has any questions, feel free to go ahead and ask or chat. I'll be sitting right here. If not, I'll jump off probably around 6:45.
I just want to take a picture of that.
Beautiful. See you, my guy. Alright, well, it doesn't look like anybody has any questions for me online, so I'm going to probably draw it there. Thanks, everybody, for being here again for my camera classes. Next week will be beyond the traditional camera. We'll get into things like GoPros and camcorders and 360 cameras and all the other fun stuff. So, as always, thanks for watching. If you have anything that you want to comment or question or ask me about, feel free to contact me with my contact information below. And as always,